Welcome to the Be the Change podcast with your host, Ralph Harper. On this podcast, he shares his vision for the future of the United States. Think of this podcast as somewhat of a roadmap to times in the future on a continuum from a dark past to the 2060s. Yep, that's right. He's a forward thinker whose purpose is to dictate positive outcomes for our children and our country versus leaving it all to chance. Ralph will cover parenting, fatherhood, accountability, and what it takes to win in this great nation. It's not just Ralph. He will have difficult conversations with other thought leaders of different backgrounds and political affiliations. It's time to get started. Here's your host, Ralph Harper.
If you haven't noticed yet, we are in the nucleus of the 2020 election campaigns. Things have kicked off, and there's a lot of things happening right now. And I'm doing this podcast today because I really need people to pay attention. I need you to pay attention because it is uncanny how Republicans have this way of kind of dictating the narrative. They have this amazing ability to drive the agenda by setting the stage for any particular platform that will cause their supporters to be energized. And in some ways, they do it to cause the Democratic side to be complacent. And it's really interesting to watch. And it's interesting because I think a lot of people just don't pay much attention to what they're doing and how they do it. And I'll give you some examples. Republicans have been excessively successful instilling in the minds of a very large faction of Republican voters, especially those who own guns, that if they vote for a Democrat or if they allow a Democrat to be elected in office, there's a good chance that Democrats will do something to take away their gun rights, to take away the Second Amendment. Most people in the country know that that is absolutely impossible to do. But there is this large faction of people who own guns, and these aren't just people of any particular race. They're just people who own guns who would rather not have their right to own guns taken away, or the way by which they purchase guns and use guns diminished in any way. And even though it's virtually impossible for Democrats or anyone else to take away the Second Amendment or take away guns from people who own them, citizens of the United States will vote for Republicans because they tout notions that they will protect their right to own guns, because that's very important to them. And they do that over anything else that Republicans seem to believe in. It's an amazing thing to witness. And the Republicans are so much better at this than Democrats are. And I tell that story because I just want to point out another fact that Republicans are starting to do now. And it has to do with pitting capitalism against socialism in the United States. And they've started to do that already. And it's starting to catch on. And I can tell you right now that if Democrats aren't careful, they will find themselves struggling to win elections over the next election period leading into the 2020 major election that's going to happen in, I think, November. And I'll tell you why this is important. Just recently, a gentleman named John Hickenlooper, he's the former governor of Colorado and a very successful business owner. He got caught in this trap with Joe Scarborough on the Morning Joe show. I actually witnessed it because I watch Morning Joe all the time. But Joe Scarborough challenged Mr. Hickenlooper by asking him, he says, well, are you a capitalist? And let me put this into context because Mr. Hickenlooper is actually running for president of the United States. And so more than likely, because Mr. Hickenlooper actually owns a business, Joe Scarborough made a conscious choice to purposefully ask him a question about whether or not he was a capitalist. And it's a pretty simple question. It's a yes or no question. And typically if you own a business, especially if you own a successful business, then that is almost the basic definition of a capitalist or capitalism. But Mr. Hickenlooper, rather than just giving a very straightforward answer and saying, well, yes, I am a capitalist because I own a business, he decided to dance around the question. Quite honestly, he was dithering. It was almost as if he was afraid to answer the question. Afraid because he perceived his constituents or people who may consider voting for him might look at him differently or may see him as someone who is a Republican versus being a solid Democrat. That's just how things work in our system. This very successful businessman stood there and was really reluctant and almost afraid, dithering, rather than just being honest about the fact that he owns a business and he's a capitalist. And he believes in capitalism, which, from my perspective, I don't see anything wrong with that. I've owned a business for the last 18 years, and yeah, that's what I am. I'm a capitalist. I believe in it, but that doesn't mean you can't be a Democrat. And it doesn't mean that because you are a capitalist and because you own a business that no one will vote for you for that reason. That's just nonsensical BS. But I make this point because I can see it. I can see it happening that Republicans are starting to dwell on this, and they will make this a huge issue going forward through the elections. And it's one of those things that could cause Democrats to fall short of their goals. And I'm making this point just to be clear about the predicament that Democrats could find themselves in if they're willing to fall for such nonsense. It's okay to say, yes, I am a capitalist, but I believe in X, Y, and Z. There's not a problem with that. So today I want to talk about capitalism versus socialism, and I want to put these two diametrically opposing economic systems into context. But beyond that, I want to propose or suggest that it might make sense that there is a third economic system that should be considered, and I will give you the basis for my view on this. First, though, let's talk about capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system where people who own businesses, and I want to put this in the simplest context, it's an economic system where people who own businesses are responsible for producing wealth, managing wealth, and holding on to that wealth if they so choose to. It's one of those things where it allows for a very few people, and only those people who own businesses, to generate wealth and cling to most of the money in an economy. And it's interesting to watch because it's one of those theories that Charles Darwin used to tout. He used to tout this notion that the strong will survive and the weak shall perish. And when you look closely at a capitalistic society, you kind of see signs of that. Signs of a very few people who are very wealthy and owned a whole lot of money and land and other possessions and so on, properties, while the majority of the people in the society are either barely getting by or actually living in poverty. This is not some kind of secret or anything. Everybody knows that this is the case in the United States of America. It's the kind of reality that begs the question, what is the value of holding on and sitting on trillions of dollars in a bank somewhere while your fellow citizens are barely getting by and in some cases living in poverty? What is the value of holding on to that kind of money? It's way too much money to spend. It's way too much money to even take care of generations of your family. We're sitting on money that is continuing to make money as it sits in the bank, while other people in our country are living substandard lives. On the other hand, socialism is a system or theory that suggests some of that wealth that is generated in a society should be in some ways redistributed to the greater population. It means that those folks who are benefiting from our economy and generating millions and billions of dollars should maybe redistribute some of those earnings and some of that wealth back into the community and back to some of those consumers who actually contributed to generating that wealth. It's a very unpopular system or theory. However, lately, some of the progressive Democrats and some of the candidates who are running for president have pronounced that they are socialist. They are very candid about the notion and about running on a platform that says, hey, yes, I'm a socialist, and if I'm elected, then I'm going to be that person willing to redistribute some of the wealth that has been generated by these corporations and business owners back to the popular community. It's an interesting concept, but I guess we'll have to see how that conversation goes as the election progresses, and we'll have to see who those front runners are, and if those people who are touting notions of redistributing the wealth of these major corporations and these individuals, we'll have to see how that conversation goes. But first, let's put wealth into context. In simple terms, wealth is the accumulation of money. It is the accumulation of assets, including land, or properties, or whatever the case may be. Anything that can be liquidated and monetized or turned into money is wealth. So I hope you're ready, because I can tell you now that over the course of this very long campaign season, you will definitely hear people talk about capitalism. You will hear the Republicans talk a lot about socialism. You will probably not hear a lot about wealth unless the Democrats bring it up. But no one will be willing to talk about, unless the Democrats listen to my podcast and realize that it makes just fundamental sense. No one will be willing to talk about how wealth is generated. And it's very simple. If you're listening to this podcast, there's a good chance that you are a consumer. Consumers are the ones who generate wealth for these individuals who own businesses and these major corporations. That is the only way by which they can become wealthy. That's the only way by which people can become wealthy individuals. Our country is made up that way. Our country is made up of a system that requires there to be a demand for something, which means that someone is willing to pay for something, and a company is willing to supply and fill that demand. the people who buy those goods and services are called consumers. In this regard, consumers are actually the most powerful people in any economic system, because they are the ones who are actually spending money and causing a few people in our country to become wealthy people, and causing these major corporations to become very successful corporations. Nonetheless, the only way that consumers will be mentioned during this election cycle is when they refer to you as constituents or individuals who are able to vote and who are willing to vote. And so while I'm a capitalist, and I can't apologize to anyone for that, that's just what I am. I'm not a Republican, and I'm proud to say that I will vote for Democrat this year. But I think it's shocking to me, this realization that most people in our country, in our economic system in the United States of America, have no idea of the power and authority of just simply being a consumer of goods and services. They have no idea the contributions they make to ensuring these major corporations and individuals who own businesses are very successful. And I want to be clear about something. It is not my intent to knock capitalism or to knock capitalist. But I think I would consider myself remiss and irresponsible not to just tell the truth about how things work in a capitalistic society. Because the absolute poorest of the poor are the people who are paying money and contributing to major corporations' success. They are contributing to individuals who are multi-billionaires over and over and over again. And these individuals who are simply living their lives as citizens of the United States and consumers of goods and services, and they don't think about the value they add to the greatest nation in the entire world. So let me walk you through a very simple transaction. It has to do with the transaction of an individual who may decide to go and buy something. And I want to just show you how that works. And it's pretty simple, but I want to walk you through the way the income statement works. So an individual, and let's say this individual is not making a whole lot of money, which happens a lot. Individuals who make less money than is required to be moderately successful in this country tend to spend a lot of their money on goods and services that kind of fall outside their means. So I'd like to use this simple example. Someone who makes $25,000 a year. But that person is very willing, and it's already proven that they do this, is willing to go and spend, let's say, to make the math simple, $100 on a pair of sneakers. And I don't want to put any company on the spot, so I'm going to use a bogus name. The name of this company, I'm going to call it Bikey. So this individual goes and he buys a pair of Bikey sneakers. Okay? Now, he's already paid $100. That money has gone over to Bikey, and they have that money in their bank account, and they're good to go. And that person just contributed to the income of that company. And that $100 will go to the income line on their income statement. So it's $100 dropped in there. So let's say that the company, Bikey, spent $25, which would be called the cost of goods sold. They spent $25 to have that product manufactured and made available to be sold. $25 they spent to do that. That's the company who spent that. Let's say that that same company also spent another $45 just for the general administration line item to market the product and get it out on the television and do the Super Bowl ads and all that other stuff that may have engendered that individual who makes $25,000 a year to go and spend 100 of his dollars to buy that pair of sneakers. So once you look at those simple numbers, right, you have the income, you have the cost of goods sold, which would be taken away from the income, which essentially means that the individual who bought that pair of sneakers has paid for the cost of that good to be sold. And then they paid another $45 for the general administration in terms of how that shoe was marketed. Okay, they paid $45 for that. And so now the company, Bikey, has made a gross profit of $30 from that consumer. That's gross profit. Now, whenever you make gross profit, obviously you have to pay Uncle Sam. You got to pay your taxes. So now they come back and say, hey, listen, we got to pay 24% tax or whatever the number may turn out to be. And so Bikey ends up paying the government, if they pay taxes, $7.20. So this is pretty straightforward. It's a pretty simple model. So let's say that the net profit, which actually goes to the bank and it stays there, and that is what that company has earned on that individual. They have made a profit of $26.80. Bikey just made, in this particular scenario that I just delineated, has made a profit of $26.80. I'm not saying that these are the actual numbers, but I can tell you right now, major corporations and individuals who own companies, this is the model. This is the way it works, and this is exactly how they make profit. Now let's take this a step further. Let's say Bikey goes out and they have this $26, but let's say 5 million consumers bought that same sneaker over the course of a year, which is doable, I would assume. Again, these numbers I haven't done any research to pull these numbers from any place. I'm just giving you a simple example. So let's say 5 million consumers went and bought that same sneaker for $100 each. The model works exactly the same for them. And this is how Bikey makes their money. That means that Bikey, the company, would have made $134 million in profit over the course of that year off of that one line item, that one sneaker design. That's a lot of money. $134 million in profit made off of 5 million consumers. Now let's just consider the fact that it's not just 5 million people or consumers who buy Bikey products in our country. Let's say the number is in the hundreds of millions of citizens and consumers who buy their products. And let's say that Bikey does not just have a single product, but they have a complete line of products, possibly thousands of different brands of products over the course of a fiscal year. And they're generating billions of dollars in sales and more than likely billions of dollars in profit each year. And the way wealth works is that there's another line on a different form or a financial document. It's called the balance sheet. There's a line item called retained earnings. And so each time they make a profit and it goes into the balance sheet as an asset, and it goes on the balance sheet as earnings or wealth, equity, each year they get to add to that number. So if they made $2 billion in the first year it goes on that line item as retained earnings, money that they have retained in the business. The next year, if they make another $2 billion, it is added to that. So now retained earnings goes from $2 billion to $4 billion. And each year that number accumulates, and that is the definition of wealth building. I decided to put this whole notion of capitalism versus socialism into context. I did that because I don't understand why it has to be so binary. It has to be one or the other. So I suggest there might need to be a different kind of an economic system. And maybe there's some hybrid of that now, because I think a lot of major corporations who make a lot of money, they have foundations set up and they give back to nonprofit organizations all the time, and they support different programs and projects around the country, and I think that's commendable. But there's a question of whether or not some of these major corporations and individuals can do more. And so I decided to just look up and say, hey, listen, what if there was a third ism, capitalism versus socialism? Why isn't there a consumerism added to the mix? So I decided to go and look up the word consumerism. And it turns out that it's interesting, because consumerism has to do with actually people like consuming more products and services, which is odd, because that means that consumers are actually consuming more products, which means that they are further contributing to the wealth of major corporations and individuals, versus there being any focus on the consumer themselves, who are actually the ones who generate every single dime of wealth in this country. It is uncanny to think about that. So it's just weird. I looked up this word and it says, hey, listen, this is a part of this definition is that it's a question of how do we get consumers to consume more. It's an interesting thought. So I don't expect people to be happy about my suggestion that I'm about to make. I don't expect people to be stoked about any notion of doing a better job of just redistributing some of the wealth that literally sits in the bank while people in our country starve. But I am going to suggest it because I think it's the right thing to do. I think people should do more in terms of giving back, because I can't perceive any value in people sitting on trillions of dollars in the bank in the greatest and most powerful country in the entire world. And so I believe that in order to somewhat balance things out a little bit and to move away from this notion that we have to have this binary system or this binary economic system where there's either capitalism or socialism, I think needs to be something inserted in the middle of that, so that there are three types of systems or economic systems in the United States. And so I'd like to introduce this notion of consumerism. And basically what this means is that major corporations, especially those that are very wealthy with trillions and trillions and billions of dollars sitting in the bank, wealth that has been generated by ordinary consumers in our society. I think there should be some level of redistribution of some of those funds. And again, this is not something that I'm proposing that is not currently being done today, because I know major companies are doing a lot in terms of making contributions and donations to different nonprofit organizations and so on. It's really compelling to see that some of the richest people in the entire world have literally donated or assigned their wealth, 80% of it in some cases, like Bill Gates and some of the others have assigned pretty significant portions of their wealth to nonprofit and foundations in support of the society. And that's exactly what they're doing. I just don't know why it's not happening fast enough, or what is required for individuals or consumers to, especially those consumers who are in dire need of support and help in our country, who have spent their money assisting in the process of building wealth for these major corporations and these individuals. Most people have no idea that Bill Gates has actually contributed and assigned most of his wealth to a foundation to support the society. And Bill Gates is not the only one. Zuckerberg has done the same thing, and others have done the same. But it needs to be easier I believe, it needs to be easier for individuals to say, hey, listen, how can I benefit from that? Here I am, especially if in cases where there might be opportunities for some of these funds to go to individuals who are looking to become capitalist. Let's use some of those trillions of dollars that, again, are sitting in banks and in foundations around the country. Let's use some of those funds to leverage like ground floor opportunities for those individuals who may want to start businesses. I would be all for that. I think that would be commendable, and for that poor person who's barely making a living working for some of these major corporations, making $7.50 an hour or even $15 an hour. Why can't we do more to support individuals who are citizens of the United States, consumers of goods and services that contribute to the wealth of the wealthiest individuals in our country? Wow, why not? I'm not saying that, hey, listen, every person in the middle class needs to join, because usually typically those are the ones who would have the wherewithal to go and sign up and go and leverage these kinds of opportunities. But no, I'm talking about those individuals who are at the lowest of the low economically in the United States of America, the greatest nation in the entire world. And wow, why not do something to kickstart some of these individuals' lives and position them to be able to better contribute to our society economically, not just by giving them money and saying, hey, listen, go do with it whatever you want, but minimally guiding them in ways that support them socially, in terms of, let's say, education, let's say mentoring programs, and so on. And especially in cases where parents are single parents who are falling short of doing right by their children. And especially in this regard, I'm talking about women as well, because 85%, I say this a lot on my podcast, I write about it, I tell stories about it on live chat, whatever it's called. 85% of single parents are women. How and it's a sad story, because quite honestly, there are some deadbeat dads out there who just don't do the right thing. Should those women be allowed to be penalized for that? Should those women be allowed to be penalized for the inaction of their deadbeat boyfriends or husbands? 85% of single parents are women. And it is hard to expect that they should still be able to give their child a fighting chance at being successful in this capitalistic society where the wealthy and the strong will survive, and the absolute weakest of us will perish and fail. So it's just a suggestion. I really think this is something that is important, and quite honestly, is something that should be executed easily. It may even be executed easily and quietly by those individuals who really believe that what I'm saying is just right. And the reason I think it's easy is because I know some major corporations are doing it today. I know they are. They have their foundations in place. Sometimes it's hard to pull money from those foundations because you have to go in and put your proposals in. And you have to go in and you have to prove that you already have a track record of doing something and adding value and supporting a community. I think some of those application processes should be altered a little bit to make it easier for the right person to come in to benefit from funds that are already made available. So again, this is my introduction of, get this, consumerism. Consumerism should not be just related to a notion of consuming more products so that all of us who own businesses can make even more money and build more wealth. It really needs to be focused on the individual consumer who actually contributed to and played a part building all of that wealth for these individuals who own businesses and these major corporations. So thank you so much for your time today. God bless you. And I will be back again next week.
Thank you for joining us on Be the Change. Be sure to subscribe today and don't forget to rate and review so we can continue to bring you the best conversations. Visit ralphharper.com for show notes, resources, and events. To support Be the Change, please join our patron community at patreon.com/Ralph Harper. Be the Change returns the same time next week and is brought to you by the 2060s Project.